Hey, everybody. Welcome to Chaos to Clarity, document management in the public sector. So looking forward to this conversation today to talk about some of the challenges that customers face whenever they manage their documentation on some of these capital government projects. My name is Justin Haas. I am a construction software technical specialist with Topcon Solutions, joined by a couple of my colleagues today, and we're excited for this conversation and hope you get something good out of it. Jerem, would you like to introduce yourself, sir?
Yes, sir. My name is Jerem Mann. I am a construction technical solution specialist here at Topcon as well. I come from a lifetime of experience doing construction in and out of it most of my life. I also have a background in accounting and real estate, most recently owning my own construction company. At Topcon here, I focused mainly on the implementation of Autodesk Construction Cloud products like Build and Cost Management as they relate to the management construction projects.
Eric, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Eric. And like Jerem and Justin, I'm also a technical specialist here at Topcon Solutions. I've been with Topcon for about 7 months now. And prior to Topcon, I worked for general contractors in the Denver metro area in Colorado. And I have about 15 years of experience with various different general contractors. And all the roles that I worked as included project manager, most recently, project engineer, superintendent, and even laborer. So my expertise on the general contractor side was mostly working with budgets and schedules and make sure that the project came in under budget and under schedule. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. To give everybody a little more background to myself before we kind of dive into the subject matter today, I spent 10 years of my working life working for a factory that built drilling rigs and equipment. And then I made the jump into construction, and I found out pretty quick construction is like the Wild West. Unlike Eric and unlike Jerem, I actually came from the subcontractor side of the fence. And I worked for 2 different subcontractors. And for one of those, I worked in the field on the PM side as an APM, managing documentation, RF procurement, all these types of things. And for the other subcontractor, I actually had a corporate role implementing Autodesk Build. And so both of those experiences are something that really, I use that experience every day here with Topcon, and it's been invaluable to me. And like Eric, I've been here about 7 months. So moving on along, we're going to be talking today about the differences between standard commercial construction projects and government construction projects as far as document management goes, both within the scope of Autodesk Build and Autodesk Docs. And so one thing about it, whether you're working on a standard commercial project or you're working on a government project, some of the things are going to be the same, right? The project lifecycle is going to be the same. You've got to design the project. You've got to gather all the material and get it ordered and on the way. You've got to actually build the project, and then you've got to close that project out, and you've got to hand it over. Players on the project are the same, right? You're going to have general contractors, subcontractors, architects, engineers, inspectors, trade team members. So all those things are going to be the same. And then the documents that you manage throughout the cycle of that project are going to be the same, right? You're going to have contracts and subcontracts, pay applications. You're going to have specs and submittals and drawings and RFIs and inspection check sheets and all these different things. And so while we've got the similarities kind of ironed out, Eric, can you kind of talk us through what you're going to deal with on the documentation side as you work through a standard commercial construction project?
Yeah, sure. So in my mind, a lot of the standard documentation that you're going to be using on a commercial project would be your submittals, your RFIs, and your change orders. And you're going to have workflows for each one of those. And typically that's going to look like you're going to get your submittals from your subcontractors. Then that's going to be pushed to the general contractor. They're going to review those submittals and make sure that they're matching up with the plans and specifications. And then they're going to push that along to the architect for their approval. And then once it gets passed on from the architect back to the general contractor, that's when you order and procure your materials. And then hopefully, depending on, the lead time of that particular material, then they start to show up on the job site and you construct the project from there.
Sure. That's kind of where the rubber meets the road. You've gone through and you've got all of your specs, your submittals, everything's approved. You've got material on the way and the project is really getting ready to take off.
Yep, that is correct. Yeah.
Sure. So when you were in the field working and the PM role, what did documentation look like for you? Was it something that you dreaded dealing with every day? Was it something that, it's a part of life for sure, but what did that look like?
When I first started working for general contractors, all that information was siloed and it lived on a certain individual's, laptop or in a spreadsheet that they had. So depending on the day and who had that information, you would have to go find it and you would have to seek it out. So if I had information on my computer, then the subcontractors would be coming to me asking me, hey, what's the status of that RFI? What's the status of my submittal that I sent you like 2 weeks ago? And then I'd have to go through and look through all of my emails and I'd have to look at my Excel spreadsheets and then I'd push out that information, and usually send it to him like in an email or give him like a hard copy or something like that, So it lived separate from everybody else and it was kind of disconnected and siloed.
Sure. So, Jerem, could you talk us through maybe some of the things that you're going to experience working on a government project and kind of how some of those things might be different as far as, documentation on a government project typically is very controlled. There's a lot of security around it. And then there's even requirements at times to hold that data for so long, to hold those documents for so long. But can you talk us through what it looks like on the government side of the fence?
Yeah, for sure. When it comes to project documentation on the government side, it's not all too different, except that there are more strict requirements. There needs to be standardization and it's mandatory about how you organize the documents, how you name those documents, how you maintain the storage of those documents, and how you share them. And on top of that are they auditable? Can you quickly access them to get the information that you need out of them? On top of that, there's going to be some pretty defined workflows and processes as in regard to approval of those documents. And on the government side, there may be many layers attached to that approval that go beyond just a couple of representatives. You know what I'm saying? So it can get pretty in depth. The protection of all of these documents. I mean, there's definitely going to be requirements as they pertain to how those documents are stored and who has access to them and who has permission to share them. Another thing that's important to remember is that, when you're working on a massive government project that's, infrastructure based, the sheer volume and size of the documents that you potentially have to store can be massive. Yeah, and can be very limiting too. So, I mean, when you're working on a project,
where does all information live?
Exactly. Yeah. So you've got to have some pretty serious capability. And also on the submission side and tracking of owner approval of things, not just on the design side, but on the implementation of different and building of certain things and inspections and, equipment and fixtures. I mean, they're all down to that. There's going to be some pretty strict requirements for those workflows and processes.
100%. And we'll talk in a bit more detail to some of those things as we work through today's presentation. But that's so true. And even that one point you made, I really like that. The amount of documentation that has to be managed on these projects, that information has to live somewhere. And before, we had cloud-based solutions, that was hard drives, that was local server farms, that was jump drives, that was laptops, local machines. I mean, notebooks, to Eric's point, notepads and folders. And
very
the
segmented.
world has definitely changed 100%. That information does not have to be siloed anymore, even on a project where that documentation is so strictly controlled. So moving along, we want to kind of talk through some solutions that we can provide to some of these challenges, right? And the Autodesk Construction Cloud, just as an overview here, all of these different things are part of that construction cloud environment. Autodesk Docs, which is central to all Autodesk products. Autodesk Build, which is what we're going to focus on today as far as project management is concerned. And then basically, whether you're BIM modeling, whether you're designing in Revit, all of these different things, Civil 3D, AutoCAD, everything that you have, and we can't stress it enough, can all live in this one safe, secure, cloud-based environment. And so that's really what we want to talk about today. And we want to start off by talking about solutions we can provide to challenges through the use of Autodesk Docs. And so Autodesk Construction Cloud, or as we call it, ACC, really does provide clients with that single source of truth. So speaking to Eric's point earlier in the presentation, when subcontractors were tracking you down and they need all this information, I mean, you're having to go to your architect, you're having to go to your design team, you're having to go to superintendents to kind of see the status of different things that are going on in the project. Autodesk Construction Cloud really does help you. I mean, it simplifies your life. It brings all that information out of the silos and kind of links it together.
Yeah. And as our first topic here says, so number A, it gives you that single source of truth for your project documentation. So it creates like a breadcrumb and gives you that historical data that you need, when quite frankly, things aren't going well on the project, So if you have a submittal that's being held up by your architect or an RFI, a lot of times you have to go through and you have to sift through your emails. You have to sift through all of your RFIs.
You have to really build that timeline yourself.
Exactly. You have to build that timeline. And within Autodesk Docs and within Autodesk Build, it creates that timeline for you. So you can just go back and at a glance, look at it and say, oh, look right here. I submitted this RFI to the architect 2 weeks ago, and I said we needed an answer within 2 days. And now our project is delayed by, a week and a half. So it gives you that historical data
right to the problem.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Speaking to your point, Eric, it's talking about that single source of truth. If you're a project manager, in all likelihood, you're working on more than one project. So you want to have the ability to segment those two things. Whereas in your general email inbox, where you're potentially tracking your RFIs now, you can go into a project and where all of that information is going to be, for that project alone, rather than having, like you said, to sift through your entire email inbox to find an email that was, 4 weeks ago with no response from an architect, right?
100%.
Absolutely.
And Jared, I'm kind of talking through something that you mentioned before on these government projects where confidentiality is so important, where document control is important, and certain people don't need to see everything. They only need to see what they need to see where it pertains to their scope in the project. And so I was wondering if you could talk through how, through the use of roles and permissions within Build and within Docs, you can kind of control those things.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's hard not to get excited when you talk about Build and then try to limit yourself on what you're supposed to talk about, because to your point, Autodesk Build has the ability to have very tight controls over all of the different tools, or what we call modules within it, and the participants and their permissions to see what and touch what. And so the most advanced set of those permissions, I think, lives within the Docs environment alone. To speak to that, when you're creating new projects, we want to build a template so you can simplify and streamline the setup of a new project. And the ability to assign permissions to roles within a project and then assign those roles out to different tasks, to different activities, and access to very specific folders. The Docs tool, speaking to some of the strict requirements with how those documents are managed, the tool allows us to add identifiers like additional text or data or context to a file and upload that file. We can create naming standards so that when new documents are uploaded to a file, it has to meet a minimum name before it can be shared and distributed. We can also create review workflows around the upload of new files. So you can establish triggers requiring new documents to be reviewed by someone at management before it can also be distributed. And again, permissioning out access to very specific folders or specific documents by role or by individual project member allows contractors to meet those very strict guidelines and requirements on these public projects.
100%. And it's like you go through and you do that work up front to decide who needs what permissions. And then you don't have to think about it again. You've already got 1,000 things going on every day in the field that that's not something you have to worry about every day. We kind of mentioned it briefly a moment ago, but on these projects, the amount of data, the amount of documentation that goes into them is massive. And if you go to using Autodesk Construction Cloud to manage these things, the amount of storage space you have is unlimited. You can have everything you need in there. And I'm wondering, Eric, how does that contrast with how you might have managed documentation whenever you were in the field? Was everything on, siloed between jump drives, hard drives, local storage spaces? Can you speak a little bit to what that looked like and some of your experience in the field?
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, like it would all just depend on what information it was. And, it could vary. It could live on my computer, it could be even at the main office, within the server at the main office, or it could be even a Word document or a hard copy. I can remember we would have the construction set of drawings, and that would live in the trailer. And if somebody walked off with that, to reference something, it would be a huge emergency on the job site. The red flag would go up and the job would stop down, would shut down, and they'd say, where did that set of drawings go? So it would just depend. It was all over the place. Or if somebody spilled their coffee on those set of drawings, then you can't read it anymore. So it was all over the place and very disconnected.
100%. And you get into, just a quick segue, but you get into those paper drawings and they're not always slip sheeted up to date or correctly. And you're flipping through trying to figure stuff out, and it's crazy. You're all over the place. And
it can be very easy to get out of date very quickly. I can remember when I was working on a project a couple of years back, we had an ASI come in from the architect, and I took the hard copy to my superintendent and asked him to slip sheet those into the set of drawings that we had on the job site. And I left and came back a few days later, and I looked at the progress that had been going on the job site, and I'd noticed that one of the steps that was in that particular ASI had been missed. And I went to the superintendent and I was like, hey, what's going on over here? It looks like this contractor installed the wrong thing here. And he's like, what are you talking about? I was like, well, it was shown in that ASI. And he was like, what ASI? I was like, oh no. So we went over to his desk, and sure enough, that ASI was on the floor next to his desk. It really helps when you can slip sheet, stuff right into Autodesk Build yourself or in Docs, and then you can have the most current set of drawings living right there, so everybody can access and, be on the same page and be building the correct thing.
Yeah, and once they start to trust that single source of truth, being Autodesk Build, being Autodesk Docs, man, the project just runs so much smoother, and it really starts firing on all cylinders when everybody knows that they can trust that what they have is the latest and greatest every time. Everything just so smooth. I can say that one of probably my favorite things whenever I was in the field and the company I was working with went to Autodesk was we didn't have to go through the VPN anymore. And I don't know if you've ever had VPNs, but for me, they never worked. You're having to log in, it slows everything down, it crashes. And with the amount of security that goes into some of these government projects, most of the government projects, not having to go through that VPN, that's a huge value add right there.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that, coming back to the sheer volume and size of some of these documents paired with that security, I think a lot of people used to be afraid of cloud, right? Because, what if the internet went down, or who has access? Can my files be corrupted? Can it be stolen? With the advancements of the cloud and the data centers everywhere around the world, massive amounts of money are being spent on protecting identity, right? Protecting people's projects' information. So I think a lot of that fear has gone away. And like you said, the sheer volume of documents, if you're using a VPN, right, and you got to sync with that VPN every time you go back to the office, the time sync alone, right? When I used to work in tax accounting, I remember trying to work from home and dialing in, and it was the worst. It was so slow. And, with Autodesk Construction Cloud docs, you get unlimited storage, and it's never slowed down by, dialing into a remote server somewhere. Wherever you have internet, depending on your internet speed, right, that information is available to you immediately and editable, right, and shareable.
And I'll add to that to take it a step further. If you're working through Desktop Connector and you have those files local to your machine, you can work when you're not connected to internet. And whenever you do connect back, everything syncs up. I mean, it's a great solution for sure. I'm wondering, as far as our next topic here, workflows that you can build out within the system to make sure that document reviews or approvals are never missed. Did you ever run into anything, Eric, where you sent a document and it just sat on somebody's desk, almost like what you're saying with that ASI right there? Some of the workflows we can build into docs ensure that there are trigger actions that when those documents are uploaded, somebody's going to see it and review it and get it where it needs to go.
Yeah, it adds a layer of accountability, So when you get that document, whatever it may be, and you submit it to your design team, then they get a notification saying that, hey, this ball is in your court. And it actually gives them, a due date saying, I need this back by this specific date. Otherwise, it's going to delay the project. It adds that layer of accountability, so everybody's working together to make sure that all the documentation is reviewed, expeditiously, so the project can move forward.
Gone are the days where you ask the subcontractor to review something when they get a chance. Hey man, when you get a minute, can you? No, like those days are over, right? You do that, they're off on another project, and they're not going to get back to you for weeks. You set those due dates, and it's like then you're following up. You're not giving them an out. You're making demands and requirements.
Yeah, and especially nowadays with lead times being what they are. Sometimes you could get an item that might be 2 years out. I was working on a project that had air handling units that had a 24-month lead time, and if you missed a step in that review process, that would just delay that already humongous lead time, and that can make or break your project right there.
Absolutely.
In a heartbeat. Jeremy, you kind of touched on this earlier, the naming convention standards that you can build in, the parameters, the guidelines that you can add to your documentation. I want to say not only does it help us whenever we're loading documents in to make sure that things are loaded in correctly and, per standard, per spec, but there's a lot of auditing that takes place in these projects. And if you have the ability to go back and look all this documentation up, which you do, you now also have the ability to make it easier on yourself because you know exactly what to look for. You know how it's loaded in, you know how to get to what you're looking for. And that makes the auditing process seamless within Autodesk Docs.
And I'd take it another step further. I'm just thinking about your turnover package, right? If you all have all of these standards and then you're done with the project and then you say, okay, here, project owner, here's this, pretty package. And they send it back to you with red lines and revisions and, requests. And it's like, well, you had all the standards from the beginning. You knew what was expected. There should be no surprise, right, that you have all this. Whereas if you build those standards in from the beginning, then you can hand over a clean package exactly as it was expected to be received.
No surprises, I didn't know you expected this. Everybody's on the same page from the jump.
You were supposed to title this one document this way. Now you have to go back to the architect to reprint everything with the correct title, right? I mean,
sure,
we laugh about it because it seems ridiculous, but if those were the expectations set from the beginning, then there should be no surprises that you need to make the fix. But if you can implement those processes in the beginning, you're going to save yourself a ton of headache on the back end.
Without question. And like I said, the ability to go back and search to find something that you're looking for and to be confident that you're going to be able to find it. You're not going to spend 3 days looking through banker boxes at a storage unit. You can just search it up, and it's right there. Now, I come from the subcontractor world. I know you guys come from the general contractor side of things. Our last topic here with Autodesk Docs is the ability for subcontractors to have all the information they need to have when they need to have it in order for them to plan their work. With everything living here in our single source of truth within the construction cloud, as a subcontractor waiting for somebody to send me what I need, I just have to go to the platform. I can find my drawings. I can find my specs. I can see what I submitted on. And, Eric, coming from the subcontractor side, we were never delayed by us. It was always the general contractor really that caused us delays, I can tell you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I mean, do you think that there's value in that? You don't have subs coming up to your projects and saying, hey, I'm here to do the work, but I need to see the drawings. I need to see what I need. I need to put a plan together. You can kind of skip all that headache with everything living right here within the construction cloud.
Yeah. I feel like gone are the days of when a subcontractor shows up on site and just was like, hey, I'm here. What do I do? Can you give me a set of drawings? Now with Autodesk Build, they can show up and that all that information lives on their mobile device or their iPad. They can show up and they can hit the ground running, rather than coming in and me having to print off, a set of drawings for them.
Yeah, I was just about to say, you're not out in the field looking at, hey, I've got some conduit that's supposed to go in right here. Let me go find somebody with a drawing set in the trailer and hope that they're not at lunch or in a meeting or taking care of something else. I can pull out on my iPad or my phone and see exactly what I need to see on the drawing. I can actually pull up the BIM model if that's available. I can see everything. I could reference an RFI right there in the field, real time, in a controlled environment where everything is the latest and greatest up to date. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah. Or if they need to review somebody else's submittal, if there's, like a plumber that needs to look at, something that's in an electrical submittal, like the power requirements for a specific piece of equipment, they have
air handler unit, chillers,
handle. Yeah. You name it. They can go in there and actually access that specific submittal rather than, like you were saying, going in and bug the very busy general contractor.
And you actually, as a general contractor, you can actually go back to that sub and say, hey, this information was here. You had everything you needed. It was published on this date. It was sent to you on this date for your review. Why are you holding my project up, Mr. Subcontractor? You had all the information that you needed from the jump.
Yeah, from before you even showed up first day. Why are you showing up unprepared?
You're just delaying my donut and Netflix time. Get with it, Mr. Subcontractor.
Yeah. So that is, in a shell, those are some of the solutions, that we can provide through the use of Autodesk Docs on these big capital projects. The next thing I'd like for us to kind of work through together is what are some of the solutions that we can provide through the use of Autodesk Build, right? So the document management side, while it does tie in heavy with Build is really going to focus more on your project management side of things, right? So the first thing that I think we should talk about is the fact that you can connect all of your records within Build. So if you have an issue, hey, guess what? That issue, that observation, that task that I just notated when I was in the field on my job walk, well, I've got a problem with that issue. And now that issue is going to turn into an RFI. And then all of a sudden later, that RFI is going to turn into a change order. And all these things, you've got your inspections that show this is why I need this RFI. You've got your photos that show that these things aren't correct, all in one clean package and all within Build. Jerem, I know that in your experience before, something like this where you can tie everything together, I mean, that would have made your life so much easier.
Yeah. Speaking to my first job in the commercial world, I was working for a hotel owner and was on a team. We managed projects and we managed design of hotels, and we were a supplement for the general contractor, and we and in between our owners and the contractor. And one of our jobs was to walk a hotel under construction and do punch walks. And so there were three or four of us, and we'd get together and we would go into every room. And the one I'm thinking of right now is a 300-room hotel in Marina del Rey. And it was a massive project. But it was beautiful when it was all done. But I remember doing our punch walks. We'd go into every room on the first floor, every room on the second floor, third floor. And then there were wings too. So we had to do each wing.
So not to interrupt, but as you're going through and you're doing these punch walks, how are you recording what's going on?
Yeah, blue tape cameras and notepads. And, knowing what we have now, looking at what is available to us, it's almost embarrassing. That was the way we used to do it. I'd go back to my desk, I'd write an email, or I'd upload photos. And, there's no real way, and there was no requirement from me to communicate that. That all went to my bosses, and I don't really know what happened to it then. But all of that very segmented, and none of that being directly communicated back to the contractor on the project, But
you're kind of relying at that point.
Yeah, any particular room could have
had at that point
15 to 100 pieces of blue tape in it, right? And who's to say the contractor wouldn't just follow right behind us and remove every piece of tape and say they took care of it? So
sure,
yeah. Well, what I love about Autodesk Build, especially from that perspective, you can do these punch walks, document it, and immediately share it with the contractor, who can then, assign out a responsibility. But that all becomes live instantly,
Yeah, it's all in real time.
Yeah, that's a clean trail that you can follow back. And, if you generate the report like you talking about you guys did, you're relying on whoever got that report to really walk through at that moment and make sure that those things are taken care of. But the only way you're going to know is to do another walk yourself, or to go back to that person and, hope that they're telling you the truth on what was taken care of or what wasn't. If we do these things within Build, you can see in real time, you can filter and you can see every issue, every task that's still open, every one that's been closed. The value there is incredible. And not only can you do that, but you can link your inspection forms, to those lists, or you can say, hey, I know you took care of this issue in that room. Where's the photo? I want to see the photo attached to it. And it takes all that guesswork out, and there's so much value in that.
Yeah. And to take it a step further, as a project manager, we would have issues come up on the job site, and we would mark it as an issue, right? And then we would create the RFI, and then from the RFI, then we could create the change order, and then we can compile all that information together and, put a little bow on it and give it to the owner. And then the owner really has no recourse to say, how did this happen? We could say, it's all right here. It's all laid out in front of you. We showed this to you as an issue. We wrote an RFI to the architect asking for a suggested solution, and this is where we're at, and it's additional scope of work. So it just gives you that data trail of information.
Yeah, and one thing that I'd like to add to that is we've been talking a lot about document control and security. This keeps everything in that secure environment. So these issues that you're noticing on these projects, everything that you're noticing is still within that secure environment. The stakeholders that are at play, that are communicating back and forth on the status of these issues or RFIs, or who's seeing the inspection reports or the daily reports or the safety reports or whatever it might be, all that is still connected in a safe place where you don't have to worry about security. You don't have to worry about somebody seeing it that doesn't need to see it. And, we kind of talked about it a good bit already, but the fact that you can access all these tools safely and securely on a mobile device. Jerem, if you're walking through that hotel and you, instead of your notepad and your blue tape, you've got your phone to take photos and create issues and fill out forms and all the things. Or maybe you just need to look at a drawing and say, I don't think this is quite right. I want to double check it. You can do all that right there on your phone.
Yeah. And, better yet, not just do it on your phone, but make the connection to the sheet. Using the Sheets tool, so powerful on the mobile device, because you can make a digital representation and documentation on those sheets to any RFI, to your issues or your observances or your punch items, making it super easy and efficient for whoever is responsible for clearing out or addressing any of these items to quickly access where those digital representations exist on a physical location. I mean, I just think that's just so powerful how those two things come together. And again, being available and immediate at your fingertips, and being able to sync any of those changes back to the cloud for all the related parties, and it's huge.
Yeah, it eliminates that.
Take the ability to mitigate that risk.
Yeah.
Eric,
absolutely.
can you speak to? You were talking about being in the field and subcontractors would come up to you. What would that process have looked like for you if they, as an example, if they needed you to write an RFI? What would that look like if you're on the mobile device and you're out in the field, that process?
Yeah, so prior to, Autodesk Build and construction management software, I would have to take my notebook out into the field and I would have to jot down the RFIs that my subcontractor might have. And I might have 5 different subcontractors coming up to me, asking me for information and wanting me to get RFIs out for clarification. And I might miss something, might miss writing something down. Or when I get back to the trailer, I might forget, just one little piece of information or something like that. And then when I write the RFI and it gets sent out to the architect, then it comes back and then I give it to the subcontractor and they would say, hey, you forgot about, X, Y, and Z on this RFI. And that's what I really needed. So with the mobile device and having it on there, then I could just go out of the trailer and then I could talk to that subcontractor and we could write it together. I could write it and then hand him the phone and say, does this include everything that you needed information on? And he could proofread it and, add anything you wanted. And then we could send it off to the architect and get an answer from there. So it eliminates a lot of steps and it frees up a lot of time.
Sure. And if you don't mind us taking that a step further, let's say you send that RFI off. Well, you've got your design team included in your Autodesk environment. Well, then all of a sudden, everything, again, is still in that environment. But all of a sudden, you've got structured workflows already built in. You've got a designated person that's automatically going to receive that RFI, right? The architect, the engineer, whoever it might be on the design side, they're automatically going to see that RFI. You've already got your deadline built in. You've got, 10 days or 14 days or 15 days, whatever it is, to review it and approve it and get it back to me. And that accountability, that clock is ticking right then. You don't have to go through your email and build out that timeline. Hey, Mr. Architect, I sent this to you how many days ago? It's all right there in Build in your activity log. I mean, you can see everything from start to finish throughout that review and approval workflow.
Yeah, absolutely. It's documented for you and you don't have to do, the hard work, all the heavy lifting's already done for you.
100%. And that's, RFIs, that's your submittals, that's your specs, that's all these different things that, are your project lives by and dies by. You can build all this stuff up ahead of time. And so, man, guys, I want to say I appreciate your time today to talk through some of these challenges on these government projects, some of the similarities to what you might be used to on a regular project, and then some of the challenges that you're going to face on the other side of the fence. And to everybody that has logged on and watched this webinar, we want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for your participation and the information you see listed here. If you want to get in touch with somebody from our team and kind of work through some of the challenges that you may be facing on your side, whether you're a general contractor, a subcontractor, or if you're on the design side of the fence, we'd love to hear from you and see how we can work with you and help you out with some of your challenges. So thanks again for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Have a great weekend.